Hello. Good morning. It is still morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present the report that was commissioned by the Fashion Summit. Thank you for asking KPMG to do it. And thank you, HSBC, for supporting this report. Last year, for those of you who were here last year, you may remember that we did a report on consumer thinking behind sustainability and how much they accept it. And this year, what we've done is looked at the UN Fashion Charter, which was also talked about earlier on today by our friends at UN. And it's really, really encouraging to see that the fashion industry is taking these proactive steps towards decarbonization and improvement in sustainability. So what we did for this report, which is you can download, I'll leave it there for a bit for you guys to download it. There are also little stands around, I think outside, that you can also scan and download the report. There is a long version and a short version. And so it really is taking a look at the baseline of where the 43 signatories are. They only signed the Fashion Charter last December. So now we're in September, so it's only been 8 months. So we can't expect that huge amount of progress has been made. The most important thing is that they signed it and they've made a commitment. So I think now it's up to close to 80 signatories. Initially there were 43, so we've already seen a doubling of the signatories. But the report was predominantly to look at the 43 that originally signed, were the original signatories. They represent around $300 billion of annual sales. So it's a really sizable group. Within these 43 organizations, there are over 90 brands represented. There were 16 commitments that were made, and far-ranging commitments. The main one being it's in alignment with COP21 and that goal of being net zero by 2050 in terms of carbon. But the first goal being 30% greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So that gives the context of the report. And we didn't look at all 16 commitments. We chose 7 selected commitments under review on the report. Those 7 commitments were more readily kind of quantifiable and accessible. And I won't go through all of them in detail, but it's really about kind of the 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. As we heard from the UN lady this morning, it is about the whole value chain. The most impactful bits is in the supply chain, and that's Scope 3. So we want to see where all the signatories are based on that commitment. And then the other thing is really, if you look at number 13, together with other stakeholders, develop a strategy, including targets, plans to advocate policies, etc. So how do we work together as an industry as well? And number 11, about establishing a closer dialogue with consumers. So if consumers are choosing it, you wouldn't really have to force anybody to do this because the incentives are aligned, the business case is aligned, and that's where we really want to get to. We're seeing that in the finance industry because the investors are really asking these questions. And when the investors are asking, then the corporates will react. And so the incentives are aligning at the investment level. And now we just want the alignment to happen also at the consumer level as well. So I think I want to go through 3 key findings that we had. Of course, there were many findings, but I wouldn't bore you with all of them. I think that the key finding really was around the availability of information. And as you can see, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, we looked at where those disclosures were based on publicly available information. And as you can see, Scope 1 and Scope 2, about half of them have already disclosed it. Scope 1 being things that you emit yourself. So say you had a boiler and there is a flue coming out with stuff, that's Scope 1. Scope 2 is things like electricity, because it's not really directly you're emitting it, is Hong Kong Electric that is doing it here. So that's kind of Scope 2. But Scope 3 is where we think is the biggest impact. And about a third have Scope 3 information. But when we actually looked at what the Scope 3 information contained, it was really still around, so Scope 3 is kind of like the logistics, the air travel, supply chain, employee commuting, waste, and the like, process, end of life, etc. So you can see that most of it is really around logistics and business travel. And yes, it's better to have anything at this point in time. So, we very appreciative that some have already given some information about Scope 3 relating to logistics and business travel. But if you look at the supply chain part, we have 5 signatories that has done Tier 1 and 6 signatories that has done Tier 2. So now I have asked my team multiple times on this. It looks a bit strange. Why more on Tier 2 than Tier 1 and all of this kind of stuff? So Tier 1 being predominantly the kind of the apparel manufacturing side. And what we said is Tier 2 is probably Tier 2 and below is really more of the kind of materials and things like that, fabrics, etc., yarn, etc. So a lot of overlap between Tier 1 and Tier 2, but there was one company that only did materials. And so that's why the Tier 2 is a bit higher. But if you look at it, so from the 43 signatories, only 5 to 6 have supply chain information kind of disclosed. So they may have supply chain information internally, but it hasn't been disclosed. So we're only looking at publicly available information, and only, so, a little bit over 10% has this kind of supply chain data. But that 30% reduction target that all of these signatories have signed up to, it is about the whole value chain. So it's not just about kind of like the logistics, transport, distribution, and have like lighting in their shops and their offices, all that kind of stuff. Reduction there is good, but I think that where we would like to see a lot more impact is really the supply chain. And I think that this is a critical aspect. And it is, as we all know, a lot of us are in the supply chain here in Hong Kong. And there's a lot of work to do to get to that, to get an understanding of that. As you know, the supply chain is far-reaching, right? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4, it is really kind of like broadens out as you go deeper into the supply chain. And how do you get the traceability done? How do you get access to that information? How do you kind of apportion to the different brands, etc.? What if you change supplier in this geopolitical world where, we're in a trade war situation? Sustainability isn't the only criteria that people are looking at. So there's a lot of complexity about that. That's why we're saying there's a lot of work to do. But take heart. I think it is really kind of, it is at least we have, a lot of players in this industry that is committed. So the key finding number 2 is really around that kind of consumer awareness. As I mentioned before, if the consumers are choosing sustainable fashion, then you don't have to ask anybody to do it. Everybody would do it anyway. But the thing is, as we've shown in last year's report, the consumers really found it difficult to understand all this information that's out there. So, here you have some organic cotton stuff, there you have some recycled polyester, et cetera, et cetera. But, there isn't a real coherent kind of like single messaging that we have as an industry for people to make those kind of decisions. Similar to kind of like other industries, if I look at the electronics industry with the IEEE, Energy Star and all that. As a consumer, I don't want to figure out the whole supply chain. I just want to kind of like look at something, okay, look at the Energy Star, it's a level 1 or whatever, and I choose it, right? You don't want to figure the whole thing out because it's ultra complex. And as such, similar in fashion, you don't want to have to figure all of this stuff out as a consumer. You just want to be told with a very simplistic message, with the industry having done all the work in the background. And that's where we need to work towards. And so 65% of the consumers from our survey last year said that they would choose sustainable option if there was more information available. So I think that consumer awareness is really needed. Now, when we looked at the brands' sites, and so the top one, 60% on their consumer website. So this is where kind of like that online shop and all that kind of stuff. So that's different from their corporate website. So that online bit, 60% has sustainability section. So 43 had a sustainability message on the product webpage on the consumer website. 35% had a sustainability product line, and there is sustainability reporting as well. So there is a level of awareness there, but I think in the end we're still looking for that kind of magic bullet of where, this is a coherent kind of like, okay, I don't mind which brand I go into. I know that, okay, a 5 here and a 3 there, I can compare that. So that is something we'll discuss on the panel. And then on the other side, which is on the sustainability reporting side, but I think that the sustainability reporting is really more for the investors, which is very important, but it's not really kind of like talking to the consumers. I highly doubt a consumer is really going to troll through a sustainability report. Otherwise, they'll fall asleep unless they really need to fall asleep. But 90% of the signatories have sustainability section on their website, and half of them have a standalone sustainability report. 16% have like bits of it in other parts of their reporting process. So I think, there is stronger kind of, you can see that there's probably stronger, investor reporting than consumer reporting and consumer information. And that's the consumer information is where we'd like to see a bit more progress. So the finding 3 is really around the existing tools available. Now, I work at KPMG, so I don't only look at Higg Index and the ZDHC and all of this kind of stuff. There are so many forms that companies need to fill out already. TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This is ultimately a game changer. I don't have time to go into it, but that is really going to hit the investment community and financial institutions in particular. Now, the science-based SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiative, is another one. And then there's Better Cotton Initiative, CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, and all of these. So, I mean, this is not a full list of it. And you can imagine the amount of forms and amount of things that all these teams need to, work on. And I think that, to be honest with you, I sometimes feel that, we don't want to have another form that people need to fill out. Can we use the existing information to get to where we need to get to. And I feel that that's kind of like where we are at the moment as an industry. We've been working on this for so many years already. There are the tools that are available already. I would implore the industry not to come up with more standards and forms to fill out, but how can we leverage the existing information, the existing tools that are available? We are already at that point in time as humanity that it's too late to kind of like argue about the nitty-gritty of this and that. We really need to get to that actionable point, get to that 30% reduction by 2030. The tools are already there. Let's work as an industry to get that done. Because if we continue to argue about the minute details, I think it's not going to add anything. And so I think the other thing is really the existing tools and standards are already there. So those are the three main findings that we had. And as again I said, we're really appreciative of the 43 and the 18 now that has signed up. And now is really time to make it count. The foundation has been set by kind of like multi-years, 10, 15 years of kind of like developing these tools. Now, we can really use those to deal with the supply chain, to get that information to consumers in a way that is coherent and really align the incentives so that it makes, it pays to do well in sustainability. That's where we really want to get to. The other findings I will very quickly go through is really around goals. So in order to get to 30% reduction by 2030, you will have to set goals. Half of the companies have set goals. But of that, 50% have set goals, 30% have joined the Science-Based Target Initiative. So science-based targets are targets that align to COP21, so align with that reduction targets globally under the Paris Agreement. So 30% have signed up to the science-based targets, but of which half of those have the targets have been approved by science-based target. The final thing is really the kind of like energy reduction measures. 77% have said that there are energy efficient measures that are being done, and 56% have said that they're using renewable energy. But what we found was that most of this is really their own operations. So where it may be their office, maybe their distribution center, really not in the supply chain area. There wasn't a lot of information about that. One of the commitments in that charter is elimination of coal-fire boilers. So I think that that is as an important thing that we need to do is to see how the supply chain is doing. Is these carbon reduction measures going down into the supply chain? So those are kind of things that we as you can see, there is a lot of work to do, but the stage has been set. And my stage has really been set as well with that. And I hope that you can read the report in detail and do give Fashion Summit any comments that you may have. Now is time for me to really invite the panelists up, and we're going to discuss some of the findings that we had and their role in this UN Fashion Charter. So first, Ms. Sandy Liu, Sustainability Manager at Lenzing. Ms. Tracy Nilsson, Senior Director, Social Environmental Affairs, adidas Sourcing. Ms. Amina Razvi, Executive Director, Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And Ms. Susanna Wilson, Global Head of Sustainable Networks and Entrepreneurship at HSBC. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining this panel. Tracy and Susanna, both of you serve on the UN Fashion Charter Steering Committee and then also subcommittees within this. We know the background about it and the signatories, but we'd like to know kind of like how it all works and your roles in it. Maybe I can start with Tracy. Tracy, you are in multiple committees. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you do with the UN Fashion Charter.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit about the Fashion Charter. We had a great introduction this morning from Lindita. So really my role that I play within the Fashion Charter, I sit on the steering committee, and to sit on the steering committee, you have to co-chair at least one of the 7 sub-working groups. I'm currently co-chairing the Manufacturing and Energy Working Group, which, as you nicely presented, is really the big chunk and a lot of the work that has to be done within that, as well as I do support the policy engagement one. So really co-chairing the Manufacturing and Energy one, our task really is to, as you mentioned, is to look at what is already available out there, what type of initiatives that are going on with regards to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and also with coal. Where are we in that landscape? So we're currently sort of looking at prioritizing key countries and really digging down to see what are those countries' opportunities and current initiatives that are going around for brands as well as manufacturers to tap into energy efficiency. What is the landscape with renewables? But also, what are those challenges that are currently existing within those countries? Because we see, for example, as we dig deeper, for example, in Vietnam, the current policies there limit the amount of rooftop solar that is possible for manufacturers to install. So again, in order for signatories, adidas being one of them, we need to overcome that. We need to sit down with policymakers and see how can we collectively work together to enhance the renewable energy that is available in the different countries. So the Manufacturing and Energy Working Group really is looking across all these sectors.
So you mentioned about country-level policies, yes, and how to facilitate that. Yeah. So how is the UN Fashion Charter through the UN able to kind of discuss these topics with the government in these countries? And is that beginning, or how is that?
Yes, so part of this sort of first initial mapping, we are sort of highlighting what countries and sort of what type of messages need to be brought to the table in these key countries, and then that's definitely with the support of the United Nations. That's why this charter is really has it's a great potential, because we have that possibility and access to those political leaders. Mm. Yes.
Okay. So currently you're looking predominantly at renewables and kind of coal and kind of just currently mapping out the whole thing.
And energy efficiency.
And energy efficiency, yes.
That's sort of the foundation to move on to sort of, yes, adopting renewables.
How about kind of like availability of data and information? Or are you just kind of like really wanting to drive these major initiatives and allow kind of, the signatories and their related stakeholders to kind of initiate them?
I would say it's sort of two-part. It is currently looking at what initiatives have already been in place, because many of the signatories have been working quite a lot with, I would say, I'll put my adidas hat on for a minute. With adidas, we have been really actively working with our supply chain on driving energy efficiency in our key markets, which is really the foundation to identify those low-hanging fruit and sort of capture that first sort of initial savings. So there's already programs that are available out there, such as the IFC, the International Finance Corporation. There is the Clean by Design. There is the Pact. So there are already multiple programs that are out there that are supporting brands together with their suppliers. And what we're doing is trying to go one level deeper to see what are the new things that are coming out and how do we go deeper. So, there's new activities that are happening, again, in Vietnam with, direct purchase power agreements. So how can we tap into that, and how can we get a seat at the table to encourage the brands and the supply chains? So we collectively bring that forward and scale that, because everybody's on a different, everybody's on their journey. Some have already started, some haven't started. So it's also important to, to allow everybody access to that information.
Yeah. So is there like a kind of one place where kind of the audience and everybody can access some of this information?
Currently, what we have a sort of an own internal UN, so all of the signatories have direct access to it. It is not yet made publicly available. It is first for the signatories. So it is an open source of information.
Okay. So
that's also a...
So maybe the message is, if you want access to that information,
sign the charter.
Okay,
However, it's just not a signature, as Lindy to clearly put out. There is a lot of work behind it. But yes, we welcome that.
So you talked a little bit about finance, so maybe I'll just go over to Susanna. So Susanna, you are running the finance subcommittee and also on the steering committee. What is the kind of HSBC? Are you guys the only financial institution in the mix at the moment?
So we're the only commercial bank involved at the moment, but I'm co-chairing the Financial Tools Working Group with a colleague from IFC. And I would emphasize that it's a working group rather than a committee. It's very much about action and working collaboratively with other signatories. So brands, NGOs, ICC are involved in the Financial Tools Working Group. And as Lindita said earlier, the group sort of came together in springtime this year, so it's still pretty early days. But the idea is that collectively we will identify some goals by the end of this year on how we will take action to bring some of those financial tools into the signatories to achieve the goals of the Charter. So at the moment, we've been doing a lot of work to look at what's out there already. I think what I bring is experience of working on sustainability within the financial services industry, and some of the commitment and learning that HSBC has developed in this space over the years in the fashion industry in particular. So we have one or two treasurers, corporate treasurers, and finance representatives from brands, but I would really encourage others actually to get involved. Both the treasurers and finance officers from the current brand signatories and any future brands that want to sign up, to really get the corporate treasurers involved, because I think that connection really is essential in order for us to make progress between the sustainability specialists and the finance specialists.
Yeah. So because the guys that is running kind of like the money may not be aware of some of this availability of different types of financing that they can use, is that probably what you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think sometimes what we see is, I mean, obviously treasurers are experts in financial tools, but they might not be experts in some of the sustainability challenges. And on the other side, many brands have experts in sustainability challenges, but those same people maybe haven't really thought through what financial tools there might be available.
So I think, I mean, for the audience, I think it is really important to think about it as you develop your kind of sustainability initiatives, to talk to your bankers, in particular HSBC, who may be able to have some special, things that they can help with. They have already come up with a number of different initiatives that is aligning sustainability with finance, and it's with Walmart and then also with Puma that were announced this year. So that's publicly available information. So HSBC has a program with Walmart, has a program with Puma, and it's sustainability linked. So maybe, Susanna, you can give us a little bit more of a background about those two initiatives.
Yeah, so I mean, HSBC made a commitment at the end of 2017 to provide $100 billion of sustainable finance by 2025. And already we've achieved, I think, 36 billion of that target. And so those two examples are part of that broader initiative to bring sustainability into the way that we work with clients on financing. And we're looking at how we can incorporate sustainability goals into a range of financial products and services, including bonds, lending, trade finance. So the examples that you mentioned, I think, are great examples of how retailers and brands can partner with financial institutions to provide a way of encouraging their suppliers in particular to make sustainability performance improvements. So the Walmart and the Puma cases, HSBC is providing tiered pricing based on a sustainability rating for the supplier. And together with sort of other tools, including education, that creates a package whereby suppliers are encouraged to improve their sustainability performance. So I think that's just one example of different ways that financial tools can be leveraged positively.
Yeah. So if you're doing business with Walmart or Puma and your relationship manager hasn't talked to you yet, proactively talk to them, and there may be something in it for you. Is this a long-term trend that HSBC is really kind of broaden out into different, perhaps different customers as well? What is the plan kind of like going forward? I know that there's this 500 billion goal. So is there a broader plan?
Yeah. Well, at the moment it's a 100 billion goal. So
okay. 100 billion. Sorry, 100 billion. Yeah.
So that might change.
Yes. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, HSBC's committed to this agenda. I mean, we've been doing a lot of training internally. We've trained more than 2,000 people, many of them frontline bankers in sustainability. And we're seeing more and more that sustainability is coming up as a topic in client meetings. So, I mean, I've been working in sustainability for 17, 18 years, and only in the last couple of years have I been starting to get invited to join client meetings on the topic of sustainability. And we have a global network of sustainability colleagues, but actually it's beyond, obviously, the sustainability function. We're seeing our banking colleagues become more and more conversant in sustainability out of necessity, because this is something that clients are asking about more and more. In where we've seen research recently which shows that 94% of companies feel under pressure to improve their sustainability performance, and that's coming from their peers, from governments and from consumers. So this is definitely a trend which is here to stay.
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of people ask us about sustainability and how much more it's going to cost and all of this kind of stuff. It's the usual kind of questions that I get asked anyway. But I think that a lot of the time it goes back to, actually, if you don't do it, how much is it going to cost you? I think in order to future-proof your organization, as you mentioned, with all of these pressures around, I think the cost of not doing something is more than the cost of doing something.
Yeah, and many companies, in fact, particularly in Asia, are seeing sustainability demands as a driver for growth. So again, I think more than a quarter of Asian companies are saying that, and that's higher than any other region in the world.
Excellent. So, Sandy, maybe I can move to you with some of the supply chain aspects. Lenzing has always been kind of at the forefront of sustainability. Can you tell us how this has impacted, your business positively or negatively?
Well, yeah, that Lenzing have a very long story and journey on sustainability. We are our corporate is located in Austria. It is a very beautiful site and surrounded by the mountain and the lakes.
Yeah.
And you can imagine how the regulations are very high in the environmental. But back to 1960s, it is not the case. So back then, there are around 70 to 80 viscose manufacturers over in Europe. But by the end of 1960 to the early of 1970, the regulatory becomes to picking up in Europe. And that regulations are very, very strict. It is strict enough to decide your company to stay alive or not. So nowadays, only very few manufacturers still exist over there, and Lenzing is one of them. So that is because Lenzing took this responsibility and actions to improve. And through different several ways. One is changing and build up people's mind, and also by innovation. So the innovations that we managed to develop the clean viscose technology, and also innovations like biorefinery. So in this way, at that time, Lenzing turned a big challenge into opportunities. So now then we are currently the world leading wood-based pulp and cellulose fiber producer. And all these decades, all these years passed, Lenzing's never stopped on the development, on the sustainability and the investment. So, for example, we integrate our pump manufacturing together with the fiber manufacturing. And also we bring this closed loop products like lyocell and tencel fibers into our commercial scale. So all this makes us different from others, and also contribute to our business success positively. And also we can meet a lot of stakeholders' expectations. So all this is a kind of a positive way. But of course, on the other hand, I've already mentioned that all these innovations or technologies, they're not coming for free. We are invest a lot. So this lead to a pressure on costs to be competitive to our peers in the industry. And also you have already mentioned that now even people talk a lot about sustainability, but sometimes the market is not ready to pay. So this also challenges our team a lot of times.
Right, yeah. It all comes down to willingness to pay. But at the same time, I know that Lenzing, you guys have already been working very closely with your customers and how to get that message across further down the supply chain and to the consumer level. So can you kind of share with us some of these initiatives, partnership initiatives that you guys have been working on?
Yeah, for example, our TCS team, they're working very closely with
So TCS is?
Technical Customer Services.
Okay.
Yeah. Our customers basically is yarn and fabric companies. So they are very closely work with them and help them to improve their processing so that to reduce the impact and also to increase such as like a duration of the clothes. So, and also give the education to the audience, no matter it's come from our customer or comes from the even university. And another example is that Candiani are working together with Lenzing. So we develop a new denim fabric. So that fabric contains around 50% of recycled content and also 50% of our refiber fiber. So the refiber is, it's a new technology that is already contains 30% of recycled fiber. So that makes us, in this way, it's just we try to avoid to use the virgin material so that to reduce the impact on water, on the land use and the climate change. So, yeah.
Right. So, and these kind of initiatives, do you think that is improving your business, or is it still a challenge from a pricing standpoint?
In fact, I think in fact, it is help the business, I believe. Of course, you bring this, all these informations or technologies to your customers, you can help them and they can help you. There's always a win-win solution. It's not just you give them, it's nothing happened. So together we develop, for example, a new fabric.
Right.
And it can increase our customers' revenue and also increase us. So it's those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, as we also mentioned in the report, that I think, this kind of partnership development model is critical for any of the signatories to be able to achieve those goals. And the other thing that they need to achieve those goals, of course, is the information and the data. So Amina, with SAC being kind of, having the Higg Index been around for quite a while, how are you guys getting involved with the Fashion Charter, and how do you think you can help with some of these signatories achieve their goals?
Yeah. Well, so the SAC is a signatory to the Fashion Charter, and we're hugely supportive of these efforts, right? These are really ambitious goals, and we know that we're not going to be able to achieve any of this progress or any of this success without actually collaborating together across the industry. And so I think that initiatives like the Fashion Charter are really important to be able to set those very big ambitions that then the industry really needs to come together and figure out how we're going to achieve it. We have many members, such as those on the stage and in the audience, who are signatories to the Fashion Charter, and we really see our role as developing the tools and the resources to help them actually achieve those goals, right? So the Higg Index is that common standard assessment to measure social and environmental performance across the value chain. And we have been working on it for some time, but that's because these are really complex issues, and getting the industry to align around a common standard that they can use and that they can really leverage, and they can really start to scale so that they're leveraging that data to not only kind of assess their performance, but to understand the insight that comes out of it, understand those hotspots, and understand how they drive performance improvement is really critical. And I think it becomes essentially the foundation for how we start to achieve these big goals together.
So you mentioned about kind of, so you guys have predominantly been working on the facilities, do I say module? Anyway, the facilities module for the past few years. So you guys have collected a lot of information already. So how can some of the signatories make use of this information?
Yeah.
And how do they access it?
Well, so I mean, many of our members who are using the HIG facility environmental module are actually already using it to help them set science-based targets or to help them actually track their progress and actually achieve their goals. And we encourage all of our members to really start to scale the use of their tools, the use of that tool throughout their supply chain, so they can actually get more data in, so that they can actually leverage it to assess their baseline, track their performance year over year, and start to identify those initiatives that will help them drive performance improvement. And many of our members are already doing that, and they're already tracking their year over year progress, and they're already improving. And that's great to see. But I think that to one of the earlier points that you made is that in order for us to really start to achieve this level of ambition, you really need to scale the use of the tools, right? We really need to see the entire industry, start to come together and leverage these tools, leverage this common standard, this assessment that already exists, to benchmark their performance and really figure out how they're actually working collectively on these big ambitious targets.
So how many people are using it at the moment, and how far do you think the index has gone in the past few years?
So, I mean, a few years ago, we had only probably about 6,000 or so facilities using the tool. And now we have over 13,000 customers, HIG users, who are actually leveraging the tools and really starting to scale their use of the tools and are starting to use it year over year, right? And that's really important, because not only are they really understanding where they started, but they're also starting to see what initiatives that they need to undertake and how they need to improve their performance and how they actually need to work across the industry together, right? So brands, retailers working with their suppliers on performance improvement is really important. And that's only going to happen if they're leveraging the tools and are actually driving that action together.
Tracy, if I move to you, so is adidas using the tool, and how would that kind of like help with some of the initiatives in the UN Fashion Charter 1? And then with your Adidas hat on, how would that help Adidas as well? I mean, do you see that there is?
So adidas has been there from the very beginning, both using the tool and contributing to the development of the tool prior to us joining the Fashion Charter. What adidas does, yes, as I said, we've really been using the tool. All of our strategic suppliers globally have had to enter all of their facilities. We download that data. But I would say over the last really 5 years, we complement the HIG facilities module with our own data tool, in which we then go one step deeper and we collect monthly data, energy data from our suppliers, because in order to have that roadmap to the 30%, it is a very ambitious target. I think it's really great that we are all on this path together. It is very ambitious. So the monthly data collection allows my team to really track the supplier's performance to our targets. And I can say that, yes, our 5-year target is now coming to an end. We've actually already surpassed our energy targets, which is really positive. But it allows us now to convert that into our facilities' GHG emissions. So we already have that footprint laid out. It also enables us to understand which countries we have the biggest footprint in. Because, if I look at the work that we're doing with the UN and the Fashion Charter, it really is going to help us highlight and focus what countries do we have to have those first discussions in, because those are the ones that we have to have the biggest reduction in order for adidas to have any chance of meeting the 30% reduction.
But, I mean, if I go back to the partnership point,
Yeah.
so you're collecting this monthly data and all of that, and the switching cost of any switching suppliers and all of that
Yes.
would be, in your role, it would be very detrimental. And with all the geopolitical stuff that's going on,
Yes.
Sustainability is not the only criteria. So how does that all play out? If your biggest footprint is in China or whatever, and then all of this stuff is going on.
Yeah. Yes, it adds a complexity. I would say our sourcing model might be slightly different. We don't tend to change suppliers. We are quite stable with our supply base, which allows us then to have this historical data. So we've been, collecting and tracking since 2014. So we already have sort of a baseline. Yes, there's always some new joiners coming in and coming out, but that fluctuation is very little. So I would say 90% of our supply chain is quite stable, which is an advantage for us in order to be able to sort of set those targets, focus on those key countries, and work together collaboratively with our suppliers. And again, making those investments because, energy efficiency or the cost of changing a coal-fired boiler to, alternative sources, those are substantial investments to be made.
So those investments are made by the supplier themselves?
Yes, we do not own any facility, so it is a collaborative partnership approach.
So the incentive for them is that, okay, I want adidas business, and
Yes.
In order to do that, I have to do this part. And is that how it works?
That's a black and white part about it, right? Yes, it's not as black and white as that. I mean, there's also a lot of underlays about it. But as I mentioned, we have a very sort of strong long-term supply-based partnership. So that longevity is there.
Yeah.
Which, again,
is
that
really
adds
important.
to that stability and, the
Yeah.
investment opportunities.
I think that is really important. Before I go into the questions, I think I just wanted to ask Amina as well. One of the things that we said in the report was really the availability of information to consumers. And from the start of SAC and from the start of the Higg Index, it was really the goal to get to that point of getting that label, whatever it is, to the consumers. So my understanding is that you will also need input from the brands and the design aspect in order to do that. Can you kind of give us a bit more information about how that's going so a lot has been done on the facility side, and it needs to be because the supply chain is so complex. But on the brand and the design side, how is that going? And how is it? When do you see, or roughly when would we expect anything available to get to the consumers?
Yeah. I mean, the Higg suite of tools is it measures social and environmental performance across the entire value chain, right? So while we have been talking about the supply chain and we have been talking about the facility module, we also have the brand and retail module and the product modules, which really look at everything from design and materials through brand processes and management systems all the way through production, so at the facility level as well. So the suite is holistic, and it's meant to be, right? It's meant to be because you do really need to be looking at the entire value chain. You need to be looking at your impacts at every single step of the way, and that's essentially why the Higg suite of tools was developed, to allow companies to understand that, to assess where they are right now and really start to make demonstrated progress towards improvement. And so while the facility module has been out, environmental facility module has been out for quite some time, the brand and retail module actually comes out in Q1 of next year, and the product module itself will also be coming out next year. But there are tools that we have that our member companies are already using and leveraging, such as the Material Sustainability Index, which also looks at materials, right? And the environmental impact of the materials that you use. And so I think that there is already a lot out there that is going to allow companies to really understand every part of their value chain and understand how to start to make improvements as they move forward. Transparency, yes, to your point, has obviously been a key focus of the SAC and is something that we've been working towards and driving towards for some time. I think what's really important for transparency is that you want to make sure that the data that is being put out there is trusted and it's credible, right? Because without having verified, trusted, credible data, I don't really think it serves any of us or what we're trying to do within the industry, to put out information that isn't verified. And so I think that, we believe that in order to get to transparency, you have to be able to verify the information. You have to be able to provide not only B2B trust in the information that they're exchanging, but you also want to be able to provide credible information that's trusted to the consumer. I think the report that you guys released last year also mentioned that. And we've been doing consumer insights about what consumers want to see, what kind of information they need to see, and what they want to be able to make those buying decisions, right, purchasing decisions. So, we're working on transparency. We're working on implementation of verification programs that allow that information to be released, and we will start releasing that information next year on the facility environmental module as that information is verified, and then go through, go from there. So I think that the information is coming, but I think what's really important is that it's verified and that it's trusted before it gets put out, kind of into that broader marketplace.
Yeah. So I want to go back to that point because actually, if I'm looking at all the questions, and we have about 15 minutes left, a lot of the questions is around cost and pricing and who's going to pay. And we talk about verification. And then it adds another layer of costs onto it and all of this kind of stuff. So how can we get to a point where, that this cost is shared between the industry rather than say the facilities having to paying for all this verification and all of that, but they don't really see a return, except that they may fear losing the business is the only incentive for them to do it. I mean, have you guys thought about that from a verification standpoint and the costs and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really important in the verification model, the model as well as just the Higg Index itself, is that it can be shared by, everyone who's doing business together, right? So as opposed to the audit model where you're doing multiple audits throughout the year and there's so much investment that's being, that's being borne by the facility going into that, the idea here is that, a facility can share their Higg Index or their verified module with every single, customer of theirs. And that's really important because it will fundamentally reduce the cost that facilities are having to pay and be able to leverage those resources to actually drive investment and improvements. But I think to the larger point, it is about how do we create kind of those partnerships between brands, retailers, and also the finance community to really start to drive investment in not only efficiency, but also that next step of really kind of getting to real reductions and renewable energy and things like that. So I really think that it's going to take not just a shift in kind of how we, the processes of, verifications, et cetera, but also really partnering together with the rest of the industry to come up with models that really start to drive those improvements.
So we're talking about kind of almost a different way of doing business, I mean, for this kind of stuff to happen. And maybe I'll just go into this question, which has the most votes. We need investment in sustainability, but the price offering to the manufacturers are getting lower and lower every year. How can the value chain drive fundamental change when the real investment is not there? So I think it is the old chestnut of pricing and kind of like the price pressures, but us really knowing that we as an industry need to do something. I'll just open it up. I don't know who to direct that to, but I think that the investment in sustainability, how can we bring it to a better model?
I mean, I think this question of who pays is really fundamental to this whole agenda. And I think that's partly why I'm so pleased, actually, that the Fashion Charter has made it so explicit in even the wording of the Charter itself, that collaborating with the investment and financial community is going to be critical to delivery of these goals. And I think, to what Amina was saying, I think there's partly a benefit in the whole industry coming together and collaborating. I mean, some of the costs of this change will need to come from working together and just being more efficient. Things like costs of audits, and just a better alignment around data and so on and reporting. But I think as well, the other way of looking at that piece is that credible data is not only interesting for consumers, it's also, of course, useful and critical for investors and for banks in providing green loans or the trade finance solution that I mentioned earlier. Credible data is fundamental to the ability to be able to provide those types of financial tools which enable or encourage sustainability. But I think as well, it's incumbent really upon all the different stakeholders within the industry to come together and look at what are the different smart ways that we can come up with to particularly enable suppliers. I think it's great what you were saying about having stable relationships with suppliers. I think that's critical as well. But also for brands to come together and look at where their suppliers are shared, and in order to be able to influence them and support them in making these investments. And of course, ultimately, from a supplier and a manufacturer point of view, it's about looking into the long term. It might seem to be a short-term cost, but actually longer term, this is the way that we expect business to go. We've been talking about this for several years now. Some of us many years. This just isn't going away. I think ultimately the businesses that don't make these investments are going to fall away.
Yeah.
And we're going to see the more advanced businesses that are making investments to improve their efficiency and procure renewable energy, becoming the leaders of the future.
Yeah. So I think, we talk about costs a lot in the industry, and I understand the pain, and I was in the industry for many years, and I understand that pain. But I think that what we're seeing, having a finance subgroup within the Fashion Charter, I think is already saying something.
Yeah.
I don't think that there was another initiative had kind of like banks and, financial institutions in there that want to support these initiatives. It was always just mainly compliance and sustainability professionals wanting to drive change. So we're already seeing that progress. And if you haven't spoken to your banker, apart from HSBC, I don't know if others are talking about this, but at least if you are working with HSBC, it is worthwhile talking to your RM about some of these things and seeing how they can support. Okay, so the next one, maybe, I think, Tracy can add some, and maybe Sandy as well. I think says, which lever within the supply chain has the biggest impact to reduce emissions, and which one has the biggest impact with least effort required?
Okay, that's a very good question. First, I would start with, it is very facility dependent, because, if you are a tier one, like a manufacturer versus wet processing, there are different impacts. What is the biggest? It's not, there's only one impact that can be cut across everything. So it really is sort of tier dependent to begin with. For the tier twos, it is the boilers. It is the coal boilers that really, it has the biggest impact. So the change over to alternative sources, that would, help first and foremost.
So really tier 2 or below, kind of anything to do with
Wet
boilers,
processing.
wet processing.
Yes, heating at very high temperatures.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, in general, in supply chains, Adidas, I mean, for us as a global company, it's almost 50% of our CO, like of our carbon footprint.
50% is in that wet process.
Is in our tier 2. So there, again, we have a lot of work to do. Tier 1s, again, you're under 10%. So really, the focus of many, you know, of the signatories and the work that we have ahead of us is coming within the tier 2s and the wet processing. So
But if we go further up the supply chain, the raw materials side, where Sandy is, is that also a big one for you guys?
It is. We are, you know, and we have addressed some of those issues when it comes to we only have 100% BCI cotton, so we're trying to take some choices on the raw materials in which we choose from the beginning. We've committed to 100% recycled polyester by 2024, so we are trying to make those commitments in, you know, up sort of in that area of raw materials. There's still a lot to do, but yes, I would say cotton and polyester are our biggest materials, so we have to start with that.
Yeah. So, Sandy, I mean, you know, you would hope that they use more viscose.
Basically, we hope use more viscose now and lyocell. Basically, we are just like tier 4 or tier. You know, in this industry, also in our viscose or model or lyocell, it is use a lot of energy, I believe. And but you know, from our side, it's to reduce the. So that's why we are doing a lot of things to reduce the energy also for the whole supply chain because we are your scope 3 emissions, right? So to reduce the whole supply chain's CO2 emission by just using this bioenergy or even transfer to low carbon incentive and fuels. So yeah. But I don't think we are the biggest, but we are on this emission count.
So you're talking about biomass, some of this.
Yeah,
do you see kind of like a risk of kind of, you know, just this fuel being readily available the whole time and things like that?
Yeah, I think this is quite a big opportunity that, especially in Asia, that the bioenergy or biomass, they're still not that available. And, you know, in fact, we try to also expand our productions, but the key parts, the key criteria that we are trying to find somewhere that the bioenergy is available. So, but it is...
At the country level? Or?
In a country level.
Okay.
For example, we have just invest $1 billion on the biggest lyocell facility in Thailand. The most important criteria is at that site, the bioenergy is available. Yeah, so that we can reduce our GHG emission and also reduce the whole supply chains.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah. So I think we have time for one last question, maybe. Okay, so maybe I'll just go with this one because all the others are, again, about pricing. I think, I mean, you know, this is probably a very broad question, but I think the students in the room may really want to hear a bit more about this. Is sustainability compatible with economic growth? It's... Any comments?
Well, I think it's fundamental to economic growth. I mean, I don't see the two as separate. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we're seeing many companies saying that they see sustainability as a driver for growth, even on an individual company level. Certainly HSBC is positioning itself to be able to provide that financing to major clients that are, identifying this as a key growth area.
Yeah, and I think that, from my experience, is really, to make the financing work, I think it is a critical thing. And when we're talking about money and there are incentives there, and incentives are aligned, then things are a lot easier. And we are getting there. So I think that there isn't kind of like either or. It's, yes, we may have to do things differently, as we've talked about. May it be kind of partnerships and using a lot more data, et cetera. And the financing models may be different. But I think that economics and sustainability, one of the legs of sustainability is that economic aspect. So anyway, I think we've run out of time, and thank you for all your questions. Thank you to the panelists. And we survived an hour and 15 minutes together. And now it's lunchtime, and I'll pass it back to the MC. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Mr. Wu and other panelists. Thank you. Please join the audience on the floor.